sorry we got interrupted. But Chris, you were talking about the transition from corporate CHR to HR work, corporate HR work to executive coaching, and how you made that transition, and how that 30 years experience in corporate has really influenced your executive coaching.
Sure. Yeah, as I was saying, I'm not sure where we cut off. I mean, most of my experience was environments with a lot of change, and working with, as part of a senior team, directly with CEOs and C-suite people on driving change in the organization. And I really enjoyed it. And the interesting thing is a lot of that is still what I'm doing today, but it's a different agenda.
Okay.
When you're in a company, you are working to a company's agenda.
Right.
And sometimes that coaching work is, you are helping that executive work on their own goals, and sometimes it's helping get them aligned to company goals. Whereas as an independent coach, I mean, my client really is the executive. And what it is they're working on with their team and what they want to do. It often starts out with similar type of work of what I was doing in corporate life, with that it's about the team. I want to make a change in my team. If I only could get my team to do this. And when you dig in deeper, it's usually often about how that leader is actually working with that team.
Right.
And that's where a lot of the coaching work I do now is.
Okay. What's the benefit of, we were talking about hiring before we went on the air, and we were talking about sort of in this competitive environment that we're in, where it's really hard to get the talent you need with low unemployment and just everything that's, what's the benefit of bringing somebody on as an executive coach to help in that process, to help your leadership team prepare for that process, to understand the kind of culture you need to create? Because if you're going to woo somebody over, if you're trying to woo top talent over, you kind of have to be ready for it, right? And you have to create an environment that is attractive for someone to say, okay, I'm going to leave what I'm doing to come over and make a big change. So I mean, everybody's facing change, right? The person coming in and the organization that's bringing somebody in.
Yeah.
And you were telling me, and I was just kind of blown away by this, is that the failure rate of new people, bringing in new people, is astronomical.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah, I was referencing some pretty recent studies where I think it was Harvard Business Review said 50% of all new hires fail within 18 months, and corporate leadership council said, well, there's actually quite a bit about the cost of new hire failure in as a multiple of earnings. So anyway, I've heard from 2 times, 3 times, even as high as 5 times. But when you look at an executive failure, there is a lot of upfront cost for sure. I mean, the search itself is usually like a third of the salary, and it's a long process. But the real cost is just the pain and the agony felt inside the organization during that 18 months, because and sometimes it doesn't take that long, but during that period, it's demoralizing for the team. It's tough for that leader because they're wondering, to make a wrong hire? Is it me? Is it them? The outside damage. I mean, customers do see there's some things going on. So it's a huge issue for business leaders to get it right. And you ask the value of bringing someone outside. I mean, part of, like, with me at least, that's what I spent my career working on.
Right.
And so I've been there. I mean, I've made those kind of hiring decisions. I made more good ones than bad ones, but I've certainly made a few mistakes along the way. So I know how tough this work is to get it right, and that it is a process that takes some discipline, diligence, and a fair bit of courage. And a lot of the conversations I have with prospective clients do start out with, I'm new in this role. either I'm a private equity environment, I've been brought in, to build this company up. Sometimes it's a turnaround, or I do get talked to a lot of people who've been moved into big jobs. Sometimes it's their first big jobs.
Right.
More often not. They're running a division or a part of a company, and they've been brought in specifically to do some kind of change, whether it's grow the business, turn it around. And they're often facing that kind of big changes and new team, new environment. And I ask a question a lot: is if you could change one thing, what would it be? And it's remarkable how often I hear, well, I would really just like to change one person, and I don't know who, or have a specific reason why, but I have a sense I have to bring something different into this culture, or I have to bring in some experience that someone's gotten somewhere else. And a lot of stuff that drives that today is technology, digital marketing, whatever it is, or international growth. There's a number of dimensions that just as a company we haven't really been able to get anyone that experience. I hear that a lot, and then that leads to really a lot of work to figure out, okay, where you want to go with the business, but a lot of people have not really thought about what it's going to take to actually make that change. Because the other one I actually hear more than I expected is we brought somebody in and it didn't work.
Right.
That it was complete organ. Well, the statistics bear it out too, right? The 50% failure rate.
Right.
But complete organ rejection, and it's often like, I don't understand it. This person knew they knew our marketing channels. They knew complementary products. They knew some things we needed to. But then the next question is, had they ever led that kind of cultural change? Had they ever won people over to some of these new ideas?
Right.
And you do still find, and you and I we were talking about some transitions in the workforce, the millennial, silver tsunami, all these things that are going on, and have been going on for a long time. But there are still a lot of companies now. If you're a newer company, the beauty is, everybody's new.
Right.
We can talk about founders a little bit, because that's that's a whole other story. But there are still a lot of big companies around, and still a lot of these big companies most of the people have been there. It used to be 20 years was a long time. Now 5 years is a long time.
Eternity, right?
But 5 years is long enough to become a bit entrenched in, and to bring somebody in new. And I've been that newcomer myself a couple of times, and after I did it for the first time, I realized, one, it's both exhilarating and exciting, but it's also hard to learn those secret handshakes and just how things get done, who's who, where the hot buttons are. And it's great if you have a mentor that's really thoughtful about doing that. But my experience is a lot of people are just so relieved they've found somebody, and the list of things to do is so long. And
onboarding is not part
and it's
of
like,
it.
I'm paying you a lot of money, and you've done it. I've found the best candidate in the world. Go do it. And the honeymoon doesn't last that long, and pretty soon people, even cases where the good news of that statistic is 50% are successful, right?
Right.
People do fight their way through it.
Right.
It is. Some of them do get help. They do get a coach. Mm-hmm. Some are just able to do it, right. But it is hard. And from my own experience, the amount of lost energy and time and doubts, and the effect of the team who's kind of watching what's going on, or how long is this person going to last? Because the last person said all the same stuff.
I've been really surprised. I don't know a lot about the industry, and maybe it's shifting a little bit, but particularly in the executive search side, it's really surprising that there's not more emphasis on that onboarding process, right? That there's not this sort of continued, you do so much evaluation to find that person, particularly if you're hiring executive search firms to do that for you. which a lot of the big companies do.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but it doesn't seem that there's a lot of emphasis on what happens when they bring that C-suite person in, or they bring that executive in, or that manager in, to onboard them, like you said, to make sure, to ensure that there's a higher chance of success.
Well, the whole executive search world is interesting, and I've certainly worked with some great ones, and I'm a big supporter of taking that approach, because they have one. You get their brand in terms of reaching out to candidates, but also a process. And most people that have been doing it and are successful are good at it. The fee structure, is really usually around placement.
Right.
And and I think a lot of the big search firms out there, almost all of them have tried to do this, but and some do. Some really do, and I think if you have a good executive recruiter, they are going to follow up. But they're not necessarily getting paid for that.
Right.
But other than their reputation is, ultimately the true measure of a good recruiter, at any level is, are you finding people that work?
Right.
It's not the cost of the search. So I think some search companies are trying. I think they've experimented. I think the breakdown in that is, and where it works well, is usually because somebody inside the company is actually making sure that happens. And that was the part of the role I had. And I brought in a lot of executives over the years with a lot of success rate. Some great people have made great changes, have gone on to great, and I really do.
Is it better to hire from within and run it internally, because then you understand, do outside firms know enough about the inside culture?
You mean for search?
Yeah.
I think it depends on what your the levels. I think certainly in how many people you'll hire a year. If you're a small business and you don't do it very often, you don't really have the tools. Most of the companies that I worked at, we were doing 1,000+ hires a year.
So it's impossible.
We did a lot of stuff internally, but executive search, we weren't like Amazon or big companies hiring a lot of executives, but we would do probably a half a dozen a year VP level searches. And there we work with search firms, because one, there's a speed, they have access to candidates, it's really what they focus on. But you've got to find partners that fit you.
That understand.
And we could talk probably a whole segment on that, but they understand you, but also, in the end, these are, people work for a search agency, but it often comes down to the partner you're dealing with. Do they know your vertical or the type of profile you're bringing? And there is certainly an efficiency. If I was looking for people, say in healthcare tech, I know who I'd call. Mm-hmm. And it may be a completely different person than who I'd look for a CFO.
Right.
So there's some transaction, but I always took it as part of my role as a CHRO to really, do that front end piece, make sure we were working with the right partner. Selection is a whole another thing. Selection and references, and knowing even before that person starts that where the risk is and how do you mitigate that. And the thing I was very hands-on in a lot of these senior searches, because I knew these things would emerge. And so I think that getting that going and then managing a process where both you're helping a hiring manager, because honestly, a lot of the executives just want to get going.
Right.
Both the candidate and the person that just hired them. These are successful people used to winning and not needing help.
Right. What is let's focus on less on the corporate for a second, and more on a majority of the businesses that are probably listening and watching and that are out there anyway. How do you minimize that failure? And like when I hire someone as a small business, medium-sized business, how do I, what are some tips of hiring for success? Hiring, making sure that they're a good fit culturally, that my culture is ready for the hire, that kind of. What can we really pay attention to be more successful?
Yeah. Well, one, I think transparency about culture, good and bad. I think very open. And that's a two-way street. We spend a lot of time, trying to understand what the candidate's really about, but I also think making sure the candidate understands what they're kind of getting into. I am a big proponent of assessments, but that are easy and not intrusive. And I do a lot of. Well, I do a lot of work. And I'm certified on a whole bunch of them, but I use predictive index a lot because it's a personality test. It has limitations, but it takes 6 minutes to do. You don't need to be an industrial psychologist to read the report, and it's helpful. And even
what does it tell you?
It really tells you, what motivates you, how you like to process information, how you like to work with other people. Are you more task-oriented, people-oriented, and what your drives are, and how you like to receive information. And where it really offers some value too is when you know that about the people that you work with,
right?
And which sets up kind of into a situation of leader, it's like my wife and I are like, my wife and I did this, and it was a lot of fun because it explained a lot of things. She likes to know the plan. She wants to know what the rules are.
Right.
The last thing I want is a rule.
Right.
I want to, but when we understood that, and we've been happily married for 28 years and probably knew a lot of this, but we actually laughed because that's very true, and it does explain some things.
It just nailed me, right?
And but when you know that about a person coming in, if you know that about a person before you even hire them, that this is a person that wants to be involved in setting the plan, or this is a person that really wants to know what you think, kind of wants it given to them, but they want some freedom to do the tactical work.
Right.
And or one of the ones I love is like recognition, that there's a lot of people saying, publicly recognized. There are people that are mortified at the thought of being in a room where the boss is saying, Rhett, you did a wonderful job. But what they really do like is you go to them afterwards and say, thank you so much. And that private recognition is much more motivating than public recognition.
So knowing all that, right?
So, and there are other assessments. I particularly like that one because it's quick, it's easy, it's super inexpensive, and it's validated. It's like really powerful, and there's a lot of validation behind it. But to get back to what makes it successful, I think one of the things, and I'll tell a story about doing a reference. And again, it gets back to knowing what you're getting into. I've done a lot of reference calls for people who've used me for references. One a few years ago was for a Kleiner Perkins seed company, for the CEO of this. And they needed kind of mad scientist and business person. And much to the dismay of the search person, the board wanted to interview me. 3 members of the board, and I picked up the phone, and it was Bill Joy, who's the guy who founded Sun Microsystems, invented Java, telling me, hang on, the other guys are coming, and I'm, after I picked myself up off the floor. But the interesting thing was, they interviewed me for an hour about the CEO, and they were very open about what they liked, but also what their trepidation were, and they weren't, I don't know if they were looking for validation, but they got it, and they were right on. What I really learned from that, participating in that, was they really asked me for my advice on what would you do if you were working with, how would you compensate with that, who else would you have on the team, what are the things we should look out for. And they took it really seriously. These guys have large portfolio of companies.
Right.
But in their experience, they found it was worthwhile to spend 3 hours of their time. And I was one reference. and I know a couple of the other people that did, and we all had the same experience. And I thought, for me, that changed my whole view of doing reference checks, not from, because no one's going to give you a reference that's not going to say you're wonderful. I mean,
right.
it has not happened too many times in my experience.
Right.
But, their approach really was, how do we make this guy successful? We're trusting him with a lot of our money. He's not going to get a lot of feedback from us. I mean, basically, we're going to talk to him a few times a year. How do we really set this up for success?
Right.
And that totally changed my view on reference checking. And the whole view of how do you start off, successfully to launch. So that's where I like the idea of assessments. I do like the idea. You and I are, both have some affiliation with Marshall Goldsmith and stakeholder-centered coaching.
Right.
The beauty of that is, you're working with the team. You're coaching a leader, but the process brings the team in. It sets up channels of communication.
Yeah.
It sets up trust, and everybody gets better.
Yeah, I want to dig into that in a minute, and that's I think a more lengthy kind of conversation about that, because I think that's a really important element of your coaching practice. So it sounds like that there's some real concrete things that you can do to make sure that you hire successfully and to integrate. Are there things that you can do as a CEO on yourself, maybe with your teams, to prepare for someone, to bring somebody in that's gonna be a major contributor?
Yeah.
Because we've been talking about what, how do you hire the best? How do you prepare your culture? Because that's got to be
it's giving me pause for thought, because sometimes the situation is nobody knows there's going to be a change, right?
Right.
So I mean, I guess in an ideal world, you have people involved, in the interviews, but even that, I mean, you're often in a situation where people are coming to direct change and people are not comfortable or don't know what that looks like. But I do think communicating transparently on, what the change is and why you're bringing somebody in, and again, soliciting their help. And I have seen it, and I've been involved in some of those searches. I mean, within the same company where, brought in an outsider, the right pedigree, competitor experience, but nobody knew why we did it.
Why you were doing it.
Why we were doing it.
Right.
And to them, it just looked like, I'll just say it, a younger version of the guy that wouldn't change,
Right.
And it really didn't work very well. Conversely, we brought in another key role, and we brought somebody from an outside industry, which the success rate in that, that's even more challenging. But we really, I think, did a good job explaining specifically from that industry what they were going to bring.
Right.
And everybody recognized, that's not something we do well. And we said, part of their success we've seen is, people around them helping. And I think the other thing we did in that case was we hired a person that was open to being helped.
Right.
Which is not always the case with executives.
No.
And that's sometimes what we do in coaching, is get people just comfortable asking for help. And I think smart executives, even when they don't need it, they realize the value of asking for help. And I think that does apply to successfully launching. When you hire somebody, is getting people that have that vulnerability,
That's tough.
even when they don't need it.
And that's tough, particularly when you're new, right? When you're coming into a situation where you want to be the authority, you want to be the guy that's going to, the person that comes in to make the rescue, right, or to rescue and to bring something new. But being vulnerable is not one of those things that you.
But there is a way, and I did coach people through this, is to be vulnerable and powerful at the same time.
Yeah.
That it's one of those things that being vulnerable feels, on the inside it feels like you're being weak, but in truth, most people respect the hell out of it.
Yeah.
If it's, as long as you're not looking not confident.
Right.
And to me, probably overused word, executive presence, but that's a big piece of it. Is
Absolutely.
how do you look confident, but
you can be confident in your
confident,
ability.
and part of your confidence is you're willing to admit you don't know everything.
Right.
Because the reality, in today's business world, I mean, you can't possibly know more than everybody that you lead. I mean, that was like 1940. Maybe that was the way it was when everybody worked in the same office, and
Right.
you didn't get 200 emails a day. Today, there's too much going on. I mean,
Right.
you have to more than ever have the right team,
Yeah.
and your value as a leader is not, is not that you are a subject expert in marketing or finance or HR or product or, it really is. You can bring all the pieces together.
You know what you need.
You know what you need, and you know how to lead.
Right.
Yeah.
You know how to
And
bring those teams together and build those teams so that you can accomplish the overall goal. What is we were talking about, you and I both have a little bit of gray hair, and I was in a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a friend of mine, and she was having, she's experienced, she's in our age bracket, and but long experience in marketing and communications, but as a sort of 50-year-old, has really struggled after she sold her company to sort of move back into a more corporate environment. And I don't think it's intentional, right? There's no HR manager in the world that's going to say, yes, we discriminate because of age.
Yeah.
But we often, I think we've all probably seen it, that we often go with someone younger. We often go with the hot shot. We often go with maybe somebody younger in a position. Is there some benefit when we're talking about diversity in hiring and diversity of thought and avoiding, groupthink and avoiding sort of our unconscious biases of what we're looking for as a manager or a hiring manager, or even as a corporate, as a leader? Is there some benefit in looking at people who maybe are a little older?
Well, of course I'm going to say that. Ask me 20 years ago. We talked about that, and it is, there is a reality out there, and I think I even used the term earlier, someone just hired a younger version of the same person they had before.
Right.
The reality today is this is really recent statistic, is there's 10,000 people a day retiring from corporate life. Mm-hmm. And I was telling you, I'm right at the age where everybody older than me is a boomer. Everybody older than me. I'm right on the, and there are, so virtually everybody, and I was never like the oldest person in the room. And I retired from corporate life at 55, and that was a long, I had that aspiration for a long time to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. But I was never the youngest person in the room. And so all these people are probably planning their exit.
Right.
And, and I've worked with people that up to age 70, they're still the most energetic person in the world. So that whole stereotype I don't think fits really well. But the birth rate's just, there's not enough people to replace all these people leaving. And I think companies often look at it as a real, this is an opportunity to bring in something fresh, some idea. And I think it is. And the truth is, millennials are running a lot of the business. So we got to stop talking about millennials,
right,
and more about the silver tsunami and the effect of that, and how you, how you backfill. What we were talking about. So one, I think there's some benefit because one, you get some wisdom. You get people that are probably less motivated by money, although
and
financial,
the show, right?
Financial, they're less running. They're more, they know themselves well. They've done it, and I mean, I can tell you, even from just personal experience. I mean, my motivations are, career-wise, are quite different than they were 10, 15 years ago, and you probably feel the same way. I think most of us do. But we also are probably less concerned about offending people because we don't care the ramifications. And I think that's where the gig economy works for a lot of people in our age bracket. Is you kind of get to pick and choose who you want to work with. So the challenge, so the benefit you get is wisdom, experience, and I think maybe some courage and a bit of the consequences are not as important. Now the flip side of that is you can also get a bit of like attitude too, which but honestly, everything I learned about having an attitude, I learned from millennials. So I blame it all on them. and that I think that's the biggest impact millennials have had is they've affected how we think. We want time off work too. It's but the challenge is it's going to be hard to recruit people out of this gig economy. It would be very hard, and again, I'll just speak from personal, it would be very hard to recruit me back to an environment where I don't have a lot of control, where I don't have a lot of freedom, where I don't have to, I can work where I have to focus on things that are not doing work that I love, which, again, honestly, I think I did learn a lot of that from millennials, or maybe it's just what happens when you get older and wiser. I don't know, but so it's going to be a challenge. I think before we're used to pay a real premium in salary for expense, and I think that is some of what drives some decisions sometimes to hire someone with less experience and everything else is, that may be reversing around as there's people in the gig economy that are, if you want to make money, you can make it in the gig economy. It's a lot of work, and there's, we can
hustle.
We could talk about that. That's a whole different conversation.
No, I think that's a whole show there.
But so it's not really about money. I mean, you're probably more limited in a corporate environment. It's just more secure. At a point in time where, if you're talented and you're good, security's probably not your
thing.
Your thing.
Well, there's security in what you're doing. If you know your stuff.
And look at the profile of people I'm working with. There's successful people that by this stage of life, they're okay. They're okay, and they're confident in their ability to do what it is. But I do think for employers, it's a bit of a dilemma. And I have had, I had a CEO that I worked for who once was giving me grief, for not hiring somebody really young for a job. And I said, I need the experience. And he said, you also, you have that in your team. You need to bring somebody in that is also going to help us understand this generation of people we're hiring and think like that. And, there was a legitimate piece to that did affect how I thought. But the reality is a lot of people in that organization had also been there for 20 years. And they were still concerned about, I didn't have to explain to them what a 401k was and why they should be in it. But I think it's going to be very interesting and to see how this does play out, because there are a lot of us that are still very young and that are quickly leaving the job world, and and I think for our entrepreneurs, this might be where there's a real opportunity. Is a lot of people our age and our stage are not, we're not looking for a salary, but we're always interested in opportunity. So pay at risk is much more appealing.
So how do you, in the stage of life that we're in, how do you start in the gig economy? It just sort of.
I'm still figuring that out, but
Because I think that's an interesting point that you were making. Is that there's a lot of opportunity there, and I mean, I don't think I didn't sit down and talk with the intent to talk about that today, but I think it's a fascinating point you bring up. That's out there, and if you have a certain expertise, wow, you don't really have to work for one company anymore, right? You can work 10 hours a week over here and do what you love, and focus on what you love, and not get bogged down.
I think my best expertise is probably a little my own journey in that, and I took. I took some time. I mean, I knew the kind of work I wanted to do. I knew, I really wanted to work with executives and smart people and help them through big change and get better. And I had the benefit of having some great leaders. I mean, really, really remarkable. Some of them were easy to work with, and some of them weren't. But some of the most challenging ones were the ones I really, really valued. But they knew they really loved doing that leadership work, and I thought, I want to stay involved with that, and I want to help people get the kind of leaders they deserve. And I think today's workforce really wants that. And I have met very few leaders that don't want to be good leaders. I really haven't. I mean,
no.
I've met a lot that don't do it well, but they still want to be good. So I had to take a little bit of time to figure that out. And when you have 30 years in a career, you know a lot of things. So you can quickly, it's like ask me anything. You have to figure out where there is a business opportunity, where is there some value for what you know, and get focused. And then what I didn't know is there's a lot of people out there that are willing to help you. I mean, there's a lot of people trying to sell you everything. I mean, we were talking earlier. I don't know if I love LinkedIn or hate it, but it's I'm very accessible. So I get, but one of the things with that is I've met so many people I didn't know that have gone down the same journey, and even in direct competition, just really helpful to say, here's some things you do. I think marketing is actually a really, and we were talking about your speaker yesterday.
Right.
For those of you, if you didn't see it, Tom, it was a really interesting
Tom
thing, because he talked about digital marketing and how still a lot of people don't know enough about it, and it's becoming a basic skill. And I think for in the gig economy entrepreneur, there's not one right answer, but there's a lot of ways to do it. So you've got to figure out
there's some do's and don'ts.
Well, and what are the options? Because it isn't it isn't just like posting stuff on LinkedIn or posting stuff on Facebook. And we learned yesterday there's a difference, But that for me has been kind of one of the real interesting pieces. And coming out of Volvo, which, and I think Tom even mentioned Volvo yesterday in his thing. A great marketing company with, I worked with great marketeers. It's a great brand, and I loved that part of that role. But I still have so much to learn, and then how do you apply that to yourself? And I'll take that back even further. I mean, if you're in corporate life, your brand is marketing.
Yeah.
So, I think that's part of it. But the biggest thing I found, and there's just a lot of decisions to make. I mean, you could easily spend all your time trying to get it perfect, get the perfect website, get the, but define your service offering,
and get it out
figure out your marketing strategy, figure out your pricing, and then it's really just business. And in a lot of ways, if there's people out there that are thinking about it, you'd be surprised at how much big company stuff, without all the noise and things that slow you down, how much of that can actually really serve you well in the gig economy. It's like really surprising.
Yeah, and there are websites out there that you can put your services on, and there are all kinds of opportunities.
I mean, I have a business coach, so here's a plug for coaching. I mean, and my business coach is a guy named Michael Hyatt, who does a lot of work around productivity and business acceleration. And one of the things I really learned from Michael is to figure out what I like doing and what I'm not good at. And he has, if you haven't seen his stuff, it's great stuff. And you should get him on your show sometime. But he talks about the drudgery zone.
The drudgery zone.
Which is like,
No
there's a
explanation needed.
distraction zone, which is stuff that's not that helpful, but you like doing. But the drudgery zone is stuff, it needs to be done, but probably not by you.
Right.
And as a entrepreneur, and you're spending your own money, you just, and you have a lot of time at first too, because until you have plans. You tend to do a lot of stuff yourself, but there is a point where you're much better off just getting out of that drudgery zone. What's in your drudgery zone is in somebody else's zone.
Sweet spot, right? I love it.
And I get asked all the time, what do I miss about corporate life? And there are three things. So one was a free car and a beautiful Volvo. But that I knew I would miss. Two is the IT department. So for all these IT people everyone complains about, be thankful, say thank you every day, because you go to the gig economy, you'll be on your own.
That's right.
Until you find someone to do it for you cheap, effective, that is helpful. And the third thing really was an executive assistant who a lot of things that were in my drudgery zone they were really good at and really loved to do. And one of the things Michael Hyatt really advocates is like getting out of that drudgery zone and hiring a virtual assistant or something. And there's a bunch of options available if anybody's ever interested in that. Send me a note. I'll refer you to some of the places or to Michael himself. But I found the whole move to be one of the hardest things I've done. One of the most exhilarating. It is a bit like changing a job. I worked for the same company for 18 years, and I loved it. It was a great company. It was easy. I knew everything. I knew everybody. Going to a new job, one of the things is it was exciting to I didn't know anybody. I had no reputation other than with the CEO who hired me. Nobody else knew who I was, so you had to build that up from scratch. And again, that's one of those things I think that actually carries over into the gig economy quite well.
Right.
Is you're really dependent on your ability to just get out there and figure it out.
Yeah.
And I'm still working on it, and that's
okay.
Yeah, it's
what we met through Marshall Goldsmith's event out in San Diego, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about stakeholder-centered coaching, because that is one of the things that you focus in your coaching practice. Can you talk about that for a minute and talk about the impact that you see it having on the organizations you've worked with, and sort of explain it if you can?
Yeah. Well,
I know you can, but
I know. You really want. Marshall there's a million YouTube videos where he talks about it, but for me, I met Marshall about 10 years ago, and it really made me think about my own style as a leader. And it came from this book of What Got You Here Won't Get You There, and he's written a lot of books, but I think that's one that's really well written and really explains the concepts well. Triggers is another one that's really great about habits and why people do things. But the whole thing around stakeholder-centered coaching is it's open and it's transparency. There's an article, and I'll put it up on my website. Leadership is a contact sport.
Right.
Which was, I think it was HBR. It was published, and it was huge. It's like and it is. That's really part of the premise behind stakeholder-centered coaching, is you are enlisting stakeholders, which it's not just like people who give you 360 feedback. It's people who are in a position to observe your behavior all the time, friends and challengers. And it's open. I mean, there are times you go into coaching assignment, people don't want to know that they have a coach, which it doesn't work so well with me. It's probably not the ideal client for me, because successful leaders, I mean, they're open, they're out there, and they are, they're goal oriented. So they're willing to say, hey, I'm working on this. And we work as a coach, one, to help them kind of fine tune that target, again, through getting feedback. And sometimes they've already got a bit of feedback that's a little more clarity. But they identify one or two things they want to work on, and one is ideal, two is not unusual, and then very simply we work with them to set up a process of getting regular feedback. So you're really enlisting the stakeholders. They're doing a lot of the coaching, and there's a structure that makes it easy for them because it is focused on one attribute or more. And there's some great statistics around follow-up in coaching that people who actually follow up with their stakeholders have, like 90% success rate or something like that. It's really, really astonishingly high success at actually changing their goals. The other important part about stakeholder-centered coaching is changing not just behaviors, but perception.
Okay.
And that's where, if you work with a coach kind of in secret, nobody sees what you're doing.
Right.
So it's actually that much harder to change a behavior that affects other people versus if they know you're working on, they're watching for change. It's also why it takes 6 months to 12 months, because even it takes a while to change a habit. If I have the whole idea of what got you here won't get you there. I mean, an example of that we see all the time is early in your career you get promoted because you get it done. You dig in, you do it, as you get to the level we talked about, you rely on others
every
to
day.
get it done,
right?
And that habit of getting it done starts to feel like micromanagement or the wet blanket manager, where people feel they can't move and make a decision without checking in. Nobody really wants to work for somebody like that, but that's a habit that takes some time to change. But you may change it, but if people don't know you're actually working on it, they may not know it. So their perception is going to take a lot longer to change, versus if you enlist them, one, it's the ultimate accountability to it.
Wow, yeah, no kidding.
But again, working with successful leaders that like to win,
I think
you're actually increasing their probability of success, because it's very public.
I think the big message out of that I've always seen is that it makes people feel like, particularly if you've been asked for that feedback and asked to be part of that process. I mean, it shows, if you're the executive going through it, it just tells me that you care, right? You care enough, that you're invested enough, that you're vulnerable enough to go through this. And it's not always easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy as the person getting evaluated and asking for feedback from everybody.
There's three core things that underpin stakeholder-centered coaching, and that's courage, discipline, and humility.
Right.
And that's a hard trio for a lot of people to really master when it comes to getting feedback.
Right.
And it does take, that's actually where the coach actually, I think, really helps out, is getting to that vulnerable space. I mean, people in principle like this, but I can tell you my experience has been when it really comes down to asking for feedback, that's hard. So some of what coaching in general, I mean, we're always looking forward, not backwards.
Right.
We can't really change much about the past, but it's like, what are you going to do next? And there's a whole idea of feed forward,
Right.
which is not asking for feedback, but saying, I want to do this. What advice do you have for me?
Mm-hmm.
Versus, I mean, I don't have to tell you that I've behaved this way in the past.
You know.
But if I'm telling you, I want to get better at holding, having meetings that are productive for everybody.
Right.
That feels a little safer, a lot safer than saying, well, what do you think about our meetings?
Right.
How can I change it? Being very deliberate up front, like, this is what I want to work on. Will you help? And of course, the other thing with Marshall, if you spend any time with him, you get really used to saying thank you, which really is a magic word. We teach that to our kids. It works with executives too.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I like that. I think that's a great takeaway. And thank you for spending some time with us on Power Lunch. We are live from Charleston, South Carolina this week. Tomorrow we've got Ben Fanning.
Great.
Yeah. And so that's going to be an interesting conversation. We'll be on the air about 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. And again, thank you for spending some time with us. Thank you for spending your valuable lunch hour or a little longer trying to learn from our guest. And please join us tomorrow. And if you want to find out the schedule, we're going to be in Mexico next week. November, we're going to be in Europe and Luxembourg. And so we've got a great schedule, a great lineup coming up over the next few weeks. So please check out the website at powerlunch.live, powerlunch.live. And if you want us to come to do a live event from your conference or your show or from your event, let's get in touch with us through the website, see if we can make that happen. But anyway, again, thank you for your valuable time. And Chris, thanks for
my pleasure. Good to see you again, Rhett.
All right, you guys have a good day.